You're listening to the Clean Comedy Podcast with your host, James Creviston.
Everybody, welcome to the Clean Comedy Podcast. It's James, and my guest today is one I've been so excited about. He's an Emmy Award-winning 30-year plus stand-up comedian. He tours nationally. He's been on The Tonight Show a bunch of times. He has a bunch of specials. And if you've never heard his stand-up, I recommend getting the Chronicles of Federman, which is a 31-year journey of his stand-up. So it's like starts from like his old stuff and goes all the way through, and you hear all these great bits that some I'd never heard before, which I was surprised because I watched a bunch of his stuff. And you've probably seen him on Larry Sanders Show. If you're like me, because I'm a big Larry Sanders Show nerd. News Radio, Silicon Valley, Crashing, which is one of my favorite parts of like Crashing is that whole couple episodes where that happens. Curb Your Enthusiasm, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Step Brothers, Funny People, I Am Comic, I Am Road Comic. And if I keep doing this, we'll be here all day. So he's also an adjunct professor at USC Dramatic School of Arts. And so USC, give him tenure. We want to make sure he always has money coming in so that he can keep doing more cool stuff for us. And he wrote a book called The History of Stand-Up, which if you know anything about me, I tell everyone about that book. It's one of my favorite books in the world. And he also writes, produces, hosts the popular podcast with the same name. And I can't wait for the next season to come out. Please welcome the very funny, the very talented Mr. Wayne Federman. Welcome, sir.
That's a classic, great introduction. Thank you so much. That was a lot. That was a lot. I appreciate it. Felt good.
I mean,
felt good.
You have an amazing career. Like it's one of those things where like you're known, but you're not like
not that known.
Like, well, no, you're known, but you're like you could probably walk on the street and nobody's gonna bother you, right?
That means I'm not known. I don't know.
No, that you.
That's exactly what I was saying. You were insisting that it wasn't the case. Yeah, I'm not really known. I mean, in a small circle of people, James, they know me. But I very much walk around. No one has any idea who I am.
Well, that happens a lot. I have a friend, Cinco Paul, who wrote Smigadoon and a bunch of other stuff. And I know him. But I came up the first time I ever met him, I saw him in a Vons by my house.
Right.
And I was like, hey, you're Cinco Paul, aren't you? And he's like, nobody knows who I am. And I'm like, I know who you are. And he's like, that's weird. But we became friends and it's okay. But like, we talked about this. He loves that little anonymity, which is great. Like famous enough to be like, yes, I can get stuff done, but not famous enough where people like will wait outside the bathroom stall for you. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, that's where he and I differ. So I would love someone to be waiting outside the bathroom stall to talk to me and get a selfie. That would be incredible.
Well,
I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I can dream, right? I'm allowed to dream.
I don't know if you really like it. Doesn't like Eminem have a song where he gets mad about people waiting outside the bathroom stall for him? That's why it seems like a terrible idea, but you know, it is what it is.
Okay.
So for people who don't know you, maybe they're not familiar with you. Tell us about your comedy journey. I know that there's going to be people who don't. I know one of my big things is I know that I just got a ukulele, and I know that you played a ukulele before on comedy. I haven't actually seen any videos of it or anything, but I probably would love to watch that. But I know you've done it before.
Yeah, that was my big closer. I've always, as a stand-up comedian, I always like to add value. So I always, for the most part, did music in my act. That continues to this day where I play piano. So, but it started with playing the ukulele, and then I needed an amp to make it sound louder. And then I was like, wait, if I overdrive this amp, this could sound a little like Jimi Hendrix or Jimmy Page or some other Jimmy. And so I would close the act playing heavy metal tunes or hard rock tunes on the ukulele, and to great acclaim. Got me on television, and it was just a great closer. I don't do it anymore, but yeah. So yes, and if I may brag, one of my career, I don't know, highlights, but one of the great things that happened to me was I got to perform at some international ukulele festivals. I call it ukulele American style, not Hawaiian style, like Hawaii isn't part of America. And then, so that was incredible. And there were some really gifted ukulele players that were incredible. But
yeah,
I sort of transitioned. I transitioned from ukulele to guitar, and now piano is my main thing. So I'd rather practice the piano, but I can still, play those tunes. And whenever I see, George Harrison or old clips of Harrison playing the uke, I'm glad that I'm part of that fraternity. There was a English comedian named George Formby who I loved watching he would do like songs that were slightly a little naughty, I guess the word is for it. But he had a great technique. And then, I don't know, I just really it was always sort of not looked down upon, but sort of marginalized because of the success of Tiny Tim. And it was like, oh, this is a weird novelty thing. But I feel like the internet really brought ukulele. Why am I talking about this? Yes, I used to play the ukulele is the answer. God.
No, because I like that's what I love about you is you have so much good comedy history like in you that like no one has done what you've done with this. There's not another book out there about the history of stand-up comedy. There's not anybody talking about those things. And me, I'm a comedy nerd. I've read everything I possibly could, like you, to try to gather all that information to find out, like, oh, this is how vaudeville started. This is what vaudeville transitioned to. This is how it worked in the northern states. This is how it worked in the southern states. Like, those things to me are so entertaining. And the fact that you get to also teach that to students at colleges, right? I'm like, I would have loved to go to that class. Like, I would have sat in your class and I would have taken it like every year I possibly could until you kicked me out. You know what I'm saying?
Okay. I think you would get it after one semester, to tell you the truth, but I appreciate it. And there's people who had written about stand-up comedy before I had, but it was always like a specific era of it. Like, there was a great book when I was starting out called The Last Laugh by Phil Berger. But that basically was like kind of the 50s to the 70s. And then Comedy at the Edge, the Richard Zoglin book, was about the 70s. And then there was a couple books on the comedy boom. So it was all kind of all over the place. And so I just was like, well, no one's done this. And so I was like, all right. And plus I had lived the last, almost 50 years of it. Like, seen it up close. Like, I saw what it was like when the comedy clubs boomed across the United States and stuff. So that's my stupid take on it.
No, it's a great take. And I think it's one of those things that as younger comedians come up, we don't know the history behind things. So we go, oh, I have this great original idea. And it's like, well, yeah, it's been done before. Maybe you should look at that first. Yeah, but no, not unfortunately.
No, it is unfortunate because sometimes you do have a brilliant idea, and just because maybe Alan King did that bit on the Sullivan Show doesn't mean you can't do your version of it.
Right.
Because, Carlin was famous for killing every premise that every comedian ever thought of because he was so prolific. He put out 14, I believe, HBO specials. So, I don't know what to do if you do a bit and then you see, oh my God, this is crazy. Robert Klein did this in 1978. Do I have to drop it, or what do you do? You do stand up, right?
Yeah, I do a ton of stand up. I just do here's the thing. I was always told that your own point of view is different. You can have a bit about airplanes and I can have a bit about airplanes. Are they going to be the same bit? Probably not. Maybe will they touch on the same premises and ideas? Probably. But my point of view on it is going to be different than your point of view. So if you can make it personal and make it your own point of view, then it doesn't matter what you talk about. That's what I was always told.
That's probably right. Who told you that? Who the hell told you that? No, I'm kidding.
Well, a lot of people told me that. Barry Katz told me that one time.
Barry Katz. Yeah.
I don't know. Just a ton of people. Like,
of course. There's a clip that I show the class of 3 comedians, Bill Burr, Sebastian Maniscalco, and Patton Oswalt, all doing the same premise, which is the your self checkout at the grocery store. When that happened, they all saw it and were like, "Oh, I'm going to filter this through my." So it's incredible to watch the differences, where it does overlap, where it doesn't, and it's fun. We have fun in class watching that.
Yeah. That's so awesome. Do you show them like the Aristocrats thing, like with all the versions?
No, because it's too long. I try to show more shorter clips to give the class more time to listen to me, because I want them to. it would be very easy just to be like, here's Richard Pryor live in concert. Here's this, watch this. And I sit back and, scroll through my Facebook or Instagram reels or whatever I'm doing these days.
That's funny. Do you show clips of other concerts, like old stuff, and then like clips of like who's on first and
I try to. Well, I do a little who's on first, but I try to focus it on stand up as opposed to comedy teams, right, or Fanny Bryce or what so like specifically one person standing on stage trying to get laughs. Gotcha. And so again, people were doing it before it was even called stand up. Like obviously Bob Hope was doing stand up before the term came around in 1947. So but I trace it back to their mid 1800s. So
yeah.
And there's believe it or not, two of the biggest touring acts early on were a guy named Artemus Ward, and then obviously Mark Twain toured the whole world. But there's no audio of Mark Twain at all. And there's some film footage of him, but not on stage or anything like that. And so, but there is Will Rogers, and there is some Burt Williams stuff. So we go back pretty far.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah. One of my comedy mentors coming up was Gene Perrette, who was a writer for Bob Hope. And Gene
he just passed away. Yeah. I know his daughter very well, Linda.
Yeah, Linda. Yep. And so they were good mentors to me when I was coming up, and I got my first writing job to write for a comedian, and he gave me a ton of advice, and I was like, this is amazing.
What comedian did you write for? May I ask? Am I allowed to turn this around?
Yeah, I can't say because I signed an NDA, but you would know them. You probably know them actually. They're pretty famous.
All right, that's cool. Yeah.
So that's my favorite thing. Now, the other thing that you used to do that you don't do anymore is the Wayne Federman International Film Festival, where you have people do that. Are you going to bring that back? Because I would love to go there.
There's a chance a version of that might happen at Dynasty Typewriter, but again, I signed an NDA, so I can't really talk about it. Sorry.
You're going to turn it around on me. That's what's
exactly.
All right.
In fact, I signed it. My joke I used to do was I signed an NDA about signing an NDA. So I'm not even allowed to talk about signing an NDA. That just so you know where I'm at with that.
So as much as you teach comedy and you talk to students, now college students, do they ever come up to you and say, after I took your class, I want to be a comedian. What advice can you give me?
Yeah. I mean, but I always tell young comedians the same thing that was told to me, and there's nothing better than getting up on stage. There's nothing better than getting up on stage, especially in front of strangers. And even better if they're paying, but if they don't have to be paying at the beginning. But if you're getting up on stage in front of strangers, you're going to learn more than you could ever learn in a class, reading a book, listening to, other comedians, sit around, chat about comedy. You can glean things, but to really do it, it's like swimming. You got to get in the pool. As much as you on the ground, this is what the stroke looks like. You have to do it. So that's my number one advice. What about you when young comedians come up to you?
I'm still young comedian. I'm only 7 years in, so I'm not even like.
I love it.
Not a veteran by any means whatsoever. My always big advice is, look, no one's gonna make it overnight. It's 10 years. Everyone's told me 10 years.
Oh, really? I think that's bad advice. I think that's bad. Yeah. Yeah. I get where you're coming from, but I've seen comedians make it within 3 years. I've seen people do it much more. Eddie Murphy was, by the age of 25, had already shot 3 movies, a special, and was on SNL. Again, he started as a teenager, so it didn't take him. But I agree with, I would, again, sorry to, I would say it like this, not that it takes 10 years. It's just like, you need to put in a certain amount of time before you even judge what's happening.
Right.
Like, I know some people, like for me, was like, and it's kind of similar to what you're saying, but it's slightly different in that I wouldn't even think about quitting or start or anything until I hit the age of 30. And at that point, I was going to reassess and see where I am. I was willing to give up my 20s for this pursuit. So I guess that is kind of true because I started in my early 20s. But I don't know why I attacked you. We're very close. We're very close. But you understand the distinction of like nobody makes it before 10 years is just not true. I mean, look at Bill Cosby, another one.
True.
he was like very early on, he was killing it. And
Well, I
then,
just think that I don't want them to think like you go on stage tonight and tomorrow someone's grabbing you off to go be on
well,
SNL or shoot a movie or whatever. But there's a lot of people that think that, right? Because the internet has shown like this like weird way of like Bo Burnham went from like being on YouTube to all of a sudden being like this great thing. So everyone thinks they can kind of do that similar thing. It's like that's not how that works,
well,
It doesn't work like that for everybody. I mean, it
of
doesn't work
course
for
not.
some people, of course, yeah.
Yeah. But I'm saying, yes, it doesn't work like that for everybody. Yes. But Bo Burnham, I talk a lot about in my book, The History of Stand-Up, from Mark Twain to Dave Chappelle, because I think he's a very important figure in the history of it all. I put him right up there with like, Bob Newhart, with the records and early, Artemis War, any of those guys. I think he's really important.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
No, he is. He is because he brought a new world of comedy to it, right? But there's a lot of people who think like if I do TikTok reels and I get all these followers on TikTok, I'm going to be the next, whatever. And it's like, yes, but also that's not stand up, right? It's like a weird thing.
Well,
where,
now,
like,
well, yeah, I understand, but would you call somebody who does like a monologue on late night television to stand up? Because it's not in a club.
well, I mean, are you talking about like Fallon comes out, he does like his jokes of like
No, it's just
current events or whatever?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's still set up punchline stuff. A lot of these are like sketches or skits that are on TikToks or whatever, and then they go and they sell at a club, and you're like, and then I've seen them struggle personally, seen them struggle doing stand up because it's not the same.
Oh yeah, of course.
thing.
I think we've all seen that.
Yeah.
I think we've all seen that. But I've also seen some incredibly talented comedians that just are on Instagram Reels or TikTok that are hilarious. And I don't know if it's directly stand up, but it's certainly a cousin to it because it's, even though you can't hear the laughter so much.
Right.
But
That's
I
true.
feel like there's a whole, anyway, even this is like, podcasting is a way of sort of augmenting your stand-up career, right?
Right.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it is. But it opens doors, but if I said to somebody, I have this podcast, we do close to 7,000 downloads every single month, whatever. They're not gonna go, yeah, come do my club. They're not gonna do that. They're gonna want to still watch my stand up and say, okay, what are you funny? Can you do this? Can you do that or whatever? It's great. And and also my podcast is skewed towards comedians, right? So I'm not trying to get the general audience here. I want comedians to see the world and get advice and understand how comedy works from all kinds of points of views, because then they can grow their career as well. That's the real big thing. And
right.
So,
well, now why do you call it the Clean Comedy Podcast? Do you have anyone?
I do have other people on that are not clean, but I'm a clean comedian, and it just started that way. It was actually started like to kind of document my comedy journey. Like I started it with my friend as I was starting my comedy journey, and I was like, I'm going to be a clean comedian and I want to see how this goes. There doesn't seem to be anybody else talking about this, so let's see how it goes. And so far so good. It's done pretty well.
Have you heard of Dry Bar?
Yes, I have.
Because if I'm not mistaken, they do clean. You can't swear on that platform, right?
Yes, sir.
And so, yeah, I feel like there's been some incredible specials that have come out of that the Dry Bar universe of like, oh, we're not going to do Netflix, but we're doing this, and it's really fun. It's interesting, and and there's also, do you know about Christian comedy? There's a whole nother. I wrote about it in my book. I can't remember the name of that website. Where
PureFlix? Is it PureFlix is the one?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah. They have a number of really clever comics, and that woman Chandra, what is her last name? She has like 10 DVDs that are incredible. She plays music also. Yeah. So I'm just thinking about the clean comedy world a little bit.
It's different. I like to make it so that I can go and do a club set and do it, and I could go to a church and I could go do whatever. And there's never going to be an issue where anybody says, hey, you can't say X, Y, and Z. One of my favorite episodes of Crashing is where Pete Holmes goes on the Christian tour and he does all the jokes about, whatever. But the one that gets him kicked off is where he's talking about Abraham stabbing Isaac or whatever. And he makes the sound, and like the lady kicks him off, and I'm dying laughing because I'm like, that's a great bit. Like you could do that in a church, but some people are a little more
Right.
uptight. Like I would still let that go. And so,
Yeah, I think Chandra Pierce used to play. I don't know if she still does those. I want to call them mega churches, like those
yeah,
big arena. So, have you played any of those? I'm curious.
I'm not
Not
that
yet.
big. No, I've
Get
done
it.
churches, but not a mega church. I've done churches around in LA area. I did a church in Alaska. I got flown up there to do that. So, I mean,
Oh,
I've got to do all kinds of stuff. I'm going up to Sacramento tomorrow to
oh,
go do show. So, yeah, I mean,
I love it.
I do a lot of stuff. I love comedy. I love stand up. I love the history of comedy. Like as soon as I found that book, I was like, this is great. And then I found the podcast and I listened to both seasons on the drive to and from Vegas to go shoot a commercial for somebody.
That's
Like just
awesome.
listen to it. My wife was asleep in the passenger seat. I'm listening to it all, and I'm like, this is amazing.
Well,
I
my
want
voice
more of
is
this.
very calming. It puts a lot of people to sleep. So,
No, it doesn't put me to sleep. It excites me because I am a comedy nerd too. Like above my desk here is people have inspired me. There's a Rodney Dangerfield album, there's a Eddie Murphy album, a Bob Newhart album, and a Steve Martin album right above my
I love
desk.
it. I love
And it
it.
reminds me of like these are different styles of comedy that people could do that have changed the world. And
Yeah.
so the first comedian that I remember seeing a special for was Chris Rock's Bigger and Blacker, and it
Oh,
was on my
wow.
birthday.
The second one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I stayed up and watched it for my birthday, and I was like, "This is amazing." And then the first comedian I ever saw live was when I was in the Navy. I had gone to San Francisco. We did San Francisco like week,
Hmm.
and Greg Proops was doing
Oh,
a
wow.
show at Cobb's on the Pier. I think it was Cobb's was on the pier at the time, and
Hmm.
we went to a show that I'd never been to live stand up before, and I was like, a foot and a half away from him, and I was like, "This is amazing. This is a genius thing. How do people come up like?" And so
It's wild. It is. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book was obviously, I mean, I feel the same way. I'm just amazed by it. I'm fascinated with the whole process of it. It's so like, even when you think like if you're scrolling through Netflix and there's like a movie that cost $18 million to make, and that's like a small budget movie, or $30 million, and these are all forms of entertainment. And then there's like, oh, there's one person standing on stage with a microphone is successfully competing against thousands of people working on a script, editors, all of that. You don't need any of that if you can make people laugh just using your thoughts and your verbal acuity. It's really something. All right, we know what comedy is. All right,
but it's like watching magic. It's like watching magic
it
happen to
is.
you in real time, and you
Yeah.
go, "How is this possible?" Like it took me until I was 35 to start comedy. So it was I was like on my bucket
Oh,
list.
okay.
I'd done all the business world stuff. I'd worked for company. I'd done all the things like that. People were like, "This is gonna make you happy. You should make a lot of money, do this." And I was like, "I'm unhappy. I'm unfulfilled." And so I was like, "I want to try this one time and see how it goes." And I did open mic, and I took a comedy class, and it went great. And I was like, "Okay." And then I did for my 35th birthday, I wrote and performed
Okay.
30-minute stand-up set like an idiot.
What?
There was 9 months from when I started to when I
Yeah,
did that
that's
show.
really
I
good.
wish I would have never. No, it was not. About 10 minutes of it was good. The rest of it was garbage,
Okay,
right?
okay.
And so that was the bug, right? Having other comedians come up to me and say, "You're funny. You should do this more." I was like, okay, there's something here. And having people after the show go, "I paid $40 to come to this, and I'm glad that I did. It was awesome. You were funny." I was
You
like, "Oh,
charged
okay."
$40 for a birthday show, your own birthday show?
It was a birthday show with dinner and drinks, everything included.
Oh,
So,
okay, okay, gotcha.
yeah, so,
Uh,
and the headliner was Preacher Lawson. So I was not headlining. It
oh,
was
I
Preacher.
gotcha, I gotcha, I gotcha.
So that's how to pay him, So there was,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
it was a good thing. Where it was one of those things where people came out, packed a room, and they paid, and we had a great show. And then people saying, "This is great. Next time you're doing this again,
Oh,
tell me, I'll
great,
come." And
great,
I'm
great,
happy.
great.
So, but you've inspired me because you talk about the history of comedy, and you've lived comedy. You've been in some of the greatest comedy movies that have existed. You're friends with Judd Apatow, which is one of my like idols for comedy writing and stuff. Like that's who I want to be. That's why part of this podcast exists. After reading his book and he got to interview comedians, I'm like, I'm going to do the same thing just on a podcast and see what happens. And
Yeah, that is true. When he was back in Long Island.
yeah. So
Yes,
what
Sick in the
what
Head.
is
I highly recommend it if you want to read
yes.
about he really delves into the creative process. It's really inspiring. That kid, that overachiever, Judd Apatow.
Well, I think we're about the same age, him and I now, sadly.
Oh, really? Okay.
So what is your favorite thing about comedy? What's the thing that
Oh.
drives you to write new jokes, or what inspires you to write new jokes? Do you like have a system? Do you set aside time every day? How does it work for you?
No, unfortunately, I don't come from the Seinfeld school. Seinfeld had an epiphany early on, and he was like, if I could work as hard as somebody who's working, I'm sure you saw that, especially did for Netflix.
Right.
Seinfeld, Jerry before Seinfeld,
Before
I think it was
Seinfeld.
called. Is that what it was called?
Yes, Jerry before Seinfeld.
Jerry before Seinfeld. So so he sees these workers, he goes, if I worked it hard as stand up as these just regular worker guys do, blue collar dudes going, I think I have a chance. And so he really would write every day, which is for some of it's very hard, but also I had a dual track. I wanted to be a really good actor and a stand up. So I had two things but I always have in my back pocket, a piece of paper and I jot down ideas. And then when I actually like when I have a show coming up, it sort of inspires me to write, to tell you the truth. That's sort of the way it works. So if I have something coming up, suddenly my mind starts, and then I'll write down bits and write down bullet points of bits. I don't write out the whole thing, George Carlin style. And yeah, that's my technique. That's my take. Pretty simple. Yeah, I find like most comedians sort of work that way, and you sort of work it out on stage, the general idea of it, and the audience will tell you whether it's funny or it's not. And then you can see the panic in my eyes, and it's great. It's everyone they can smell it on me. They can smell the fear. So it's really fun for them.
Well, no, doing a new joke is always the scariest thing in the world because you're like, I think this is funny. I worked on this, but now I'm going to display it for all of you, and you're all
Right.
going to decide whether I'm a hack or whether this is funny, right? And that, at
Right.
least for me, that's the fear that I get is they're going to go, okay, good job, guy, and then
Right now
whatever.
you're exposed. You're exposed. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, obviously, it's different for everyone, but this is why I'm a big Jerry Seinfeld fan. I know I've mentioned his name a number of times because for better or worse, was sort of emotionally detached from his act. And I remember once I think it was the Barbara Walters special, he said that sometimes when he's doing stand up, he's watching it as it's happening. And then afterwards, unlike most comedians, myself, maybe you, who have the fear like, oh, they don't like me. Jerry's more like, oh, they didn't like that joke. Let me see if I can fix that joke. It has nothing to do with Jerry Seinfeld. It has to do with the wording, the structure of that joke. Or maybe it's just not a strong enough premise and then he has to get rid of it. But he always looks at it like a scientific way as opposed to an emotional, I need your love. And if I'm not getting it from this joke, this triggers something that my dad didn't tell me after a softball game or whatever reason, people go into comedy for.
no,
So
that's
I
true.
always thought that was fascinating. Yeah.
I wish I had that detachment. I don't have that detachment. I go because I write all my jokes. His jokes are observational of the world and a lot of wordplay work in there. We're going out, now we're out, we're doing this. Like, he does
Yeah.
it that way. It's not, you don't know Jerry's real point of view 100%. Like, you don't know who
Right.
Jerry is. Like, if you
Well,
see
in a
Jerry
way,
Seinfeld's like,
but yeah, I feel like he does reveal more than you think he
right.
does. Because you're like, oh, this is a guy who observes life and is analytical about life and is maybe even, ADD about life. I mean, I don't want to put a medical thing on it, but so it's like, I feel like I'm learning a lot about him and his relationship to people that transcend the, why are there, the socks in the dryer bit or whatever he's doing. So I do feel like there's a little more to Seinfeld, a lot more to Seinfeld
Right.
than just those words on there. I think he is revealing something about himself, and he's also revealing that he's a incredibly, incredibly talented comedy writer and performer.
Of
Like he's
course.
just he's talented. So there's also just that. There's just, oh, I'm watching a very talented person on stage.
Right. But I mean, I guess I come from it for where if you took Jerry away from the jokes and you gave those to another person to do,
It
they
might
could
not
do
be.
those. Yeah, they could do those jokes. Those jokes would still exist. Would they be as good? Maybe, maybe not. Or would they even be performed as well? Maybe, maybe not. But they could be done by other people. Whereas, like a joke, like you know, Jim Gaffigan's Hot Pocket joke or Jim Gaffigan talking about his kids or whatever. Those would be harder for somebody else to do because it's the specific point of view on those.
I don't know about so much about the Hot Pockets.
Hot Pockets, yeah, probably anybody can do that.
That's a straight up observational thing. Yeah. Guys, how many people are listening to this right now as we dive into comedy? You know what they say, when you dissect comedy, it dies on the operating table. So, guys, welcome to the autopsy here. It's a good question. Yes, obviously, if you make it personal, but about your kids, but sometimes even those jokes can translate into someone else. But I mean, that was why Richard Pryor was so revolutionary, because he was so personal. You couldn't believe it. It was like an open wound. He opened a vein or something to do his comedy. And it was really thrilling to listen to, as opposed to, maybe a Bob Newhart bit about the, SS Codfish or something like that.
Some of those best. That's why I like all the different kinds of comedy. I think you are in the same vein as me. Of like, all those different kinds of comedy have shown what's possible in comedy, like what you can do. Like Bob Newhart took a phone bit, like he lost his partner and then took that other side and just turned it into a bit that then ended up being all over the place. I've seen a stand-up special of Bob Newhart's where he comes out and like is on a stage with like a weird big, I think it's like a big ear and a telephone next to him or whatever. It was just kind of an interesting way of doing it. And like, nobody's done that before. And I thought it was like,
no. Wow. Well, if you've read my book, people have done telephone before Bob Newhart, obviously. Many comics. It's even on the podcast. I do a whole thing about George Jessel with him calling his mom.
Right.
That's from vaudeville. That's from the 20s, maybe late 20s. Okay. And there was but the first comedy record of all time. Again, we're losing listeners every moment.
We're not.
When I talk about, there was a guy named something Heyman. It's not John Heyman, the comedian, and he had a bit called Cohen on the Telephone. That's the first million-selling comedy record. That's 1913. So it's been around a while. Again, Bob Newhart. What was great about Bob Newhart was, I mean, it's just fascinating, that whole album. I could go on and on. We could do a whole podcast about that album, The Button Down Mind. Now, it won the Grammy for Album of the Year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it beat out like Sinatra, Nat King Cole, and Harry Belafonte. Like, that would be as if Jim Gaffigan just beat out Taylor Swift and Adele and Kendrick Lamar for Album of the Year at the Grammy. It would be unthinkable. It wouldn't even be in the realm of possibility. That's how popular that album was. So I don't want to take anything away from Bob Newhart. I idolize the guy, but the telephone technique had been around way before him.
Right. But I mean, he had a partner previously, if I remember right. Like
not on stage, just in radio. Yeah, a little bit.
And then he lost his partner, and then he took those and turned them into like a one-sided conversation type.
Right,
which I think is like super hard to do. I would love for somebody to bring back that style again. I don't know if we'll ever.
Well, are you familiar with Ellen DeGeneres?
Yes, I am.
Her first Tonight Show was a telephone call to God. Same thing, one-sided. One-sided phone conversation. But the interesting thing is, there was another comedian who had an album the year before Bob Newhart's called Shelley Berman, who also did the phone stuff. So it's been around. It's been around.
Right. What
this
is
your...
the
takedown Bob Newhart?
I know we're not taking down Bob Newhart.
I love him.
I think he won like the next year too with like his second album. Like, didn't he like win 2 years in a row or something like that? Or like one and two.
He won
on the chart, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a wild time. This is the early '60s. They came out in '60, and then the award ceremony was in '61. So he won Best New Artist, Album of the Year, and then Comedy Record of the Year. It was called Best Spoken Word back then, or something. Was for his second album. So he won 3 that year. I mean, there's been no stand up close to that as far as Grammy recognition.
Yeah,
it really was. Yeah.
What is you're a great actor, you're a great comedian, and obviously a great writer. Have you ever wanted to like write and produce and direct your own like movies and stuff like that, like a Judd Apatow type thing?
A little bit. I've just been so focused on other things that maybe now, as my my whole career is winding down as it's all starting to fade to black, slow dissolve to nothingness. That maybe I could do have a Larry David kind of thing, because but it hasn't been I did write a movie, but it had nothing. It was a horror movie. It had nothing to do with me. It wasn't a vehicle or anything like that.
Right.
So I have written some stuff, but I've just been busy.
You're a busy guy.
I try to be.
No.
When I'm not playing basketball.
Do you see? I've heard someone say this before, that horror is the other side of the coin of comedy. Do you think that's true?
Oh, well, I don't know if I agree with that, but earlier you said that. Can I loop back to something you said earlier?
Yeah,
And I'll
of
try
course,
to tie
sure.
that. You were saying that did you felt like stand-up comedy was sort of like a magic trick in a bit, and I do. There is an element of that, and they're both based on surprise.
Right.
Like you are like, oh my God, I'm surprised that ace is behind my ear, and I thought it was
Right.
in the deck of cards, and oh, I'm surprised you came up with that. Great idea and oh, this is beautiful. It's a surprise, a zig and a zag. So, but I also think horror has that a little bit. There is an element of, besides the jump scares, of like, oh, this is surprising. So, yeah, I don't think it's the opposite, but I just think drama is the opposite of comedy. But
Well, no, I mean, two sides of the same coin. So, like, if you could write comedy, you could write a horror movie. Which
oh.
someone said that to me, and I can't write a horror movie. I've been working with somebody on a horror movie for almost a year now, and I'm not good at it. But if
Do you like
ask
the
me to sit-
genre? Do you like the genre?
I love watching horror. Like, horror is one of my favorites. I grew up on it. I
Like
have a whole joke about
slasher,
it.
or what specifically? What era do you? What kind of do you like?
I like sci-fi horror, but I grew up on like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, all that stuff like
Slasher.
that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
those
yeah.
slasher kinds. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like one of my all-time favorites.
Oh, really?
Of all time.
Okay.
Yeah. So I love that, but then I sit down to write this script for somebody, a producer, and I can't bring myself to do it. But if you ask me to sit down and write a comedy script film, I could sit down and do it and not have a problem doing it. But for some reason, this horror movie keeps like stopping me. I'm like, I don't know what I'm missing here. So I don't know.
That might be the universe telling. I don't know. Or maybe you're not
James, don't write
passionate.
horror movies.
No. I'm just saying maybe you're not passionate enough for it. I don't know. This isn't a life coach session. I don't know why you can't finish your horror movie.
Oh, no, I was just saying. I wonder, like, if they're like, two sides of the same coin, shouldn't a comedy writer be able to write a horror movie?
Not necessarily. I don't think so. I don't know who's told you that. I don't know who. Again, you probably signed an NDA from somebody who gave you some advice that you can't tell me. But yeah, it's hard.
You're one of my favorite guests of all time, by the way.
I love it. Let's
I feel
keep
like
going.
we know each other, like we're friends or something. But I know that we're not even on the same level. You're like way better than me. But I feel
If you only knew. All right.
So you did talk about the film festival. You talked about advice for comedians. I have like a list of things to ask you.
Let's do it. Let's do
I'm
it.
so excited.
But I'm also curious about you, so I don't want it to be all one-sided. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'll let you. We'll do
No,
this. I asked you a question. Now you can ask me a question.
No. I like to piggyback on what you're saying.
So, when you how many times do you take a joke and have to break it down and rewrite it before you know a joke is ready? Was like, this is the final version, or is there ever a final version?
No, it's really weird. Like, even jokes I've been doing for years, and I'm one of those who's like, I'll do a joke for years, because I just, if I don't do it, burn it on a special or anything like that, I'm going to do the joke, and I always find new tags or a new point of view or new emotional angle, even if the words don't change. And then I'm like, oh, I should have been doing it this way the whole way. Stupid. Now I don't even like the version that's on the record. So yeah, that's why I really admire those comedians who do a special and then never touch that material again, because you never have to worry about that. But I'm not that type of comedian.
I don't like that type of comedian. I like when comedians will come, because people can, like, a musical artist can always come and play their greatest hits for a thing. But like, for some reason, it's so taboo for a comedian to do that. Like, I saw Gaffigan at the Greek. He did his whole brand new set, and then he came out afterwards and did a bunch of like the greatest hits, right?
Yeah. What do you call it? Also does Brian Regan does a version of that also.
Yeah,
where he comes out at the end and takes requests, but they're always the same. UPS thing or something, or first guy on the moon or whatever. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, it does work. It does work once you get to that level. The letter I've seen comedians, but basically what we said earlier, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, that comedy is and stand-up is based on surprise. Right. So once the surprise, people know the surprise, it's not going to have the same juice. Unlike the Eagles playing Hotel California, they can't do a show without playing Hotel California. They can't do it. Like, people would be furious. Whereas, like Seinfeld doesn't have to do, cotton balls or whatever, the whole riding a horse or whatever these classic bits were. People don't want to hear it. They want to hear new stuff. And so, except maybe they want to hear new stuff. But it is interesting that, like, that Gaffigan and Brian Regan are able to do, like, Gaffigan does Hot Pockets, I think, almost at one point, almost at every live show. So I guess there are exceptions to it if you have, like, a transcendent bit that, what do you think? I'm asking you. This is your question. No,
I saw Jerry. I've seen him 3 times in Vegas. Okay. He's one of my favorites. When he used to do Vegas every year, I would go out there and see him. Mm-hmm. He hasn't done it recently. But the 2 of the 3 times I saw him, he did basically the same sets, and they were a year apart. He added some new jokes and changed some things in there, but they were basically the same sets over and over, and I still laughed. I loved them because I knew, even though I knew what the punchline was going to be, even though I knew what it was, to me it was like, again, like I said, I'm watching magic, and even though if I know how the magic trick works, and I like magic, I think it's a great thing, I still enjoy it. I can enjoy the moment of that. Like, you did this,
I know. It is a good question. It is because it is kind of curious, because I still believe the juice of stand-up is hearing that joke for the first time and laughing, and the audience and the comedian reacting to the level of the laughter, deciding when to start up the next joke or the tag or something like that. So it's a back and forth is the way I describe stand-up comedy. Or Dana Gould described it, and I quote him in my book. It's a conversation, but only one person is talking.
Yep. That's what I always tell other comedians. I'm like, you have to think of this as a conversation. You talk, they laugh or they don't laugh. Then you know how this conversation is going. Is this a good conversation or a bad conversation? I mean, that makes sense,
interesting. Right? Well, I don't know if I would put it in terms of good and bad. I would put it into, that's curious. And like, the whole thing is curious. Like, instead of framing it as, if they don't laugh, it's a bad thing. It's like, that's a curious thing and an opportunity for maybe me to go off in a different direction, as opposed to immediately, this is bad. Because I've seen every great comedian not get laughs at, when they're working on material.
Right.
So
I think
maybe I know this is a weird, like no, this is so inside of baseball. It's like inside, we underneath the cowhide. It's it's just, think of it as an opportunity as opposed to a good or a bad thing. Even if it's going well, it's still an opportunity. That would be my advice from Professor I'm a professor at USC.
I love that. Actually, my wife was like, "Can you take his class?" Because she knows how big of a nerd I am. And I'm like, I've looked on the site, and he has no classes currently, but I will if the moment that you have.
What are you talking about? I'm taught on Monday. What are you talking about?
Really? I looked on the USC. Maybe they don't want outsiders who don't.
No, they don't want. They want.
They're like, they saw my IP address and they're like, "No, you're poor. Go, get out of here." So, I forgot what I was going to say now, because that was very funny. But I just try to always think of every part as a conversation. And I'm not, I guess, good and bad, is just a black and white way of looking at it. But I always try to think of, like, am I getting a laugh here? Am I not? If I'm not getting a laugh here, if it's not going the way that I want, I need to go back and reevaluate this joke and figure out, did I do something wrong? Is it not written right? Are they not understanding the punchline? All those kind of things like that. There are comedians also who tour for 20 years, never changing their set, right? It doesn't exist as much anymore, but there were a lot of comedians back in the day who could just go from town to town to town to town to do those things. And there's also jokes or albums that we go back to. Like, I could listen to Rodney Dangerfield's album, the No Respect album, over and over and over again. I know every single one of those jokes, but they always make me laugh, even though I know what's coming, because
You're slightly psychopathic.
Maybe, yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't know.
Well,
yeah, I know. There is a comfort in re-listening to those things.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you think that? So do you think that a comedian could just tour like the Eagles or whatever, like a Jerry Seinfeld could just go and do all the same jokes forever and never have to
No,
write another
because
joke?
he retired all of his
Well, he
jokes
did retire all his
after.
jokes. That's
Yeah,
true.
he retired all
I
his
was telling you
jokes.
for the last time.
But
Yeah.
he does. He is not a Louis C.K., George Carlin comedian in which he does his set and then gets rid of it. Like
Right.
he feels like, and I quote him in the class: "Jokes are miracles," and it's really hard to come up with a really good closer, and it's really hard to come up with he likes to kill. Jerry Seinfeld loves to kill, so he just doesn't toss it away as the new hour, and then this is something I'm doing this year, and then I'm going to do something, because I think he has a higher standard and wants anyone that goes to his show to have an incredibly good time, is my guess. So he'll do jokes like you said. You'll see him a year, and then a year later he'll be basically the same. That's Seinfeld. Like, unless he puts out a special with it, he's still doing his killer material, and he feels like that's a valuable way to be a comedian. I don't want to speak on his behalf. Get him on the show and have him tell you.
I've tried, believe me.
No, but he's talked about it. He's talked about it numerous times that he just he's not a big believer in, I'm working on my new hour, because he always feels like the new hour is 20 minutes of great stuff and 40 minutes of filler. I'm pretty sure I heard him say this. Again, I shouldn't be speaking on his behalf, but I just think he's one of the great practitioners of stand-up in the history of the medium. That's where I write about him in the book. And yeah, incredible dude. Let's stop talking about it, because I feel
no, I appreciate it. So
yeah.
What projects do you have coming up? What things do you have coming up that you're excited about? Because you're here for you. I'm not.
If you have home box office, some people call it HBO. There's a documentary that I produced. I was the producer. There's also executive producers and other thing. Judd Apatow co-directed it, called George Carlin's American Dream. It's 2 parts, and it's a documentary. Just won the Emmy Award. I have an Emmy Award in the house. I'm in my media room right now, and media room / garage. So it's. Yeah, so I'm very thrilled about that, and I loved Carlin so much, and just endlessly fascinating talking about that guy, like, who, because different people from different political stripes like him for different reasons or dislike him for different reasons, but I mean, talk about a wordsmith, man. And at the end he said he realized that he was more of a writer that performed his writing, like that's what he became. A writer with these very provocative ideas. So it's called George Carlin's American Dream. If you're into stand-up and the history, it's really good. You might find it interesting. And it's on HBO or HBO Max, not Plus. Max. For some reason, it's not a plus. Yeah, not a minus. So that's what I'm working on. And I also have an acting gig that I did in December for a TV show called What We Do in the Shadows, which is on FX, and that'll be on later this year.
Awesome. I love that. What We Do in the Shadows is amazing.
Oh, well, hopefully I don't ruin it. Hopefully my acting does not ruin it.
You won't ruin it. You make things better. Like
Thank
that.
You.
That whole those. I go back and watch those 2 episodes with you in it, with the fake lymphoma, which I know some people thought was real, actually, right? Didn't they think it was real?
Yes. You're talking about crashing now. Yeah,
crashing. So, but like, you make it better because you give Pete Holmes' character advice or whatever during it and stuff. That's why I was like, man, I have to talk to him, because
yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I know you're acting, and I know that but you also, you have so much knowledge and so much valuable information to give to the world, that it feels like a big brother talking to you when you do your podcast. Like, even though you're giving me the history stand up, there's advice and pieces of gold in there that make you go, okay, I really need to reevaluate X, Y, and Z in my comedy career.
But just so you know what we were talking about earlier, even like going back to the beginning part of this podcast, it's like everyone approaches comedy differently or stand up differently. And so I don't ever want to say there's only one way to do it and this way, or because I like Seinfeld and I do it in this style, that's the way. Like it might not work for you at all. You may have to write out everything before you go out on stage, memorize it like it's an Ibsen play and do it. Other people, it might be just a bullet point. Other people don't write down anything at all. Ever write down it? It's all up in their computer brain. So I want to be one of those people that's like, this is what I do. Maybe you want to do it this way. It's worked for me. Worked kind of well for me, obviously. Like I said, I can go into Vons. Nobody knows me. Vons. Nobody. And so that's how I just hate people that are like, this is the way you have to do it. And if you don't do it this way, you're wrong. Like, in fact, they're wrong.
The only thing that's true about comedy is you're supposed to make people laugh. That's like the only real rule, right?
And there's room for debate even in that. Like, Let me give you an example. There was a comedian by the name of Andy Kaufman.
Yep.
And one of his acts was getting up on stage and reading from what was it? It was an F. Scott Fitzgerald novel, and that was the act. And it was kind of funny at the beginning, and then people were like, "Is this it?" And then later on, it got more, and some people walked out, and some people loved it, and like we're figuring it all out, like what boundary you can push for it to still. Again, as a rule, yes, it's the laugh face, the comedy and the tragedy. Yes, we're in that school of making people laugh, and 98% of it is that. But I feel like there's 2% of it that's it can be. And obviously, are you familiar with Nanette? Are you familiar with that special? Yeah. So there was a lot of controversies. Like, is this even stand up? So we're figuring it out. That's all.
I guess that makes sense. I guess the rules of comedy is there's no rules of comedy. Is that true? Like, is that where
it's not? I'm saying there's no rules. I'm saying yes, and as a rule, yes, but there are exceptions. I would say as a rule, you have to elicit laughter, but there are exceptions to that. Even back in the 60s, or even what Lenny Bruce was doing sometimes with these rants and stuff that weren't always funny, but were kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
And Carlin did the same thing. There were long runs he did that weren't funny. We're like, what the, So, I'm not setting any parameters other than basically this is what it is, but there are definitely exceptions.
Oh yeah, there's always exceptions to the rules, and that's what I love about the history of stand-up is there's so many ways that people have come at that stand-up that it makes it entertaining and wonderful. I wish we did have a Mark Twain recording. I would like to hear one of his.
That would have been great.
That would have been one of the best things, because I was like, that's such a, and because he made a living, he toured around doing those. I think they call them stumps or something back then.
Yeah, yes, it was more like they called it. It was like comedy lectures and stuff, and even in the minstrel show they would do stump speeches. So, but it was all the same thing. You're standing on stage alone, trying to get a laugh, either doing like character voices or telling long stories, or doing deadpan like Artemis Ward did. But is that this is something that I think is really important when you're studying the history of stand-up, that stand-up as a rule is ethereal. It's for this moment. That's why all the references really adds a certain juice to the whole thing. It really pumps it up. Like, so you're in this time, and stand-up tends to go bad. It's like milk. It tends to go bad. So over time, and that's just the nature of what it is. And that's why very few transcend generations. It's just because the styles change, the subject matter, obviously, we know about that. That changes. And it used to be always expanding, and now lately it's been contracting. We're going to see how that all shakes out. But when you're judging, like, I don't know, Artemis Ward or Alan King or even Eddie Murphy, and like people who grew up with that are always going to love that comedy for a number of reasons, because it puts them back into the place when they were a teenager and they first heard this stuff, and that makes them feel good. But so just be aware of it, that it's stand-up comedy is not something that's supposed to be like stand-up over time. No pun intended. That is not supposed to, that's not supposed to be relevant over time. It's literally for what it is. That's why George Carlin is so fascinating, because some of his things that he said seem like prophetic. Like he could see what was going to happen in 20 years. I mean, he died 2008, right? June 22nd, I believe, 2008. So, and some of the things he said, people still share his clips on social media. Sorry to go off. I just want, like, for myself, who's a comedy nerd, and I love listening to early comedy records and radio shows and Jack Benny and all of those guys, Fred Allen, that it's not supposed to be like, oh, this is the most hilarious stuff I've ever heard. But if you can kind of put yourself in that mind space, it's really entertaining and I love it. I love it. But it is ethereal as a rule.
Yeah. Well, I like to listen to all ages and all stuff that I wouldn't even have been around for to listen to. I love that stuff because it gives me a view into that moment in time, that moment in history, right, where somebody's saying that. Like Eddie Murphy couldn't do the Delirious special now. Like he couldn't open with those jokes that he does, where, telling people not to look at him and stuff. And I think he had to apologize recently for that or something, if I remember right.
But that's just the nature of a person developing over time. And like, looking back, because times change. Yeah. Like there used to be a bunch of jokes about hitting your wife. There's not that many jokes about that. Of course, my act is full of them, but I'm saying basically you're not allowed to say that kind of thing.
That's right. I'm just saying, I find all kinds of stuff funny. I'm not offended by almost anything. I can't think of anything that really offends me. If it's funny, if you can deliver something funny, then I'll laugh at it, if no ifs, ands, or buts.
But this is my whole point, is that funny for one person is different than for someone else. So there is that's funny. It's just like, that's funny for me, or that's not funny for me.
That's true.
So,
that makes sense.
I know.
like that. That's why you're the smart one. That's why you're a professor. I'm not a professor.
USC. For USC. Let me think if there's anything else. I feel like you're in that wrapping up mode.
I don't want to take up your time. I would spend all day with you. If I could,
brother, thank you.
But I don't want to do that to you. That seems rude.
Okay. All right. So that's it. If you're interested in reading my book, you can go to a place. It's called Amazon.com. You have to have a web. You have to be able to surf the internet to get it. That's where you order it from. And it's in paperback, although in March, the middle of March, probably March 15th, the Ides of March is my release date. The hardback version is coming out for people who don't like paperback books, and the audio version will be out. So with an updated chapter, I have a whole chapter about what's going on, the slap, post-COVID comedy.
Will that be updated on the Kindle version too? Like, will that get?
I think I can do that. Yes, yeah.
My wife won't let me have any more books anymore, so I have to do everything on Kindle. Sadly.
I love it. All right, so is that it? What are we doing?
All right. So where can people find you? Where can they find your tour dates, all your stuff? Go to WayneFederman.com or go.
Well, I would go more. Follow me on Twitter @Federman or Instagram @InstaFederman.
There you go. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please go check out the Clean Comedy Podcast. We're on YouTube. We're on all the sites. We are growing every week, every month. We're at 600 on YouTube because I don't push that very much. But if you guys would go like and subscribe on YouTube, let's get over 1,000. I know you guys are watching it because I know the episodes get watched all the time. And I appreciate all of you, Mr. Federman. I appreciate you so much. This was so great. Thanks, you all. Man. Please go check out the History of Stand-Up Comedy. He has a great podcast. And when season 3 comes out, I will definitely mention it on the podcast because I mentioned it to you guys way too much. You probably think I am paid for by
I'm not,
but I'm not. I'm not at all.
Thanks also for promoting the book. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me.
It's fantastic. I push it as much as I can. I'm like a pusher of your book. There you go.
Okay. All right, brother.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.